Hello and welcome back to the Audible Finish, where we discuss the week gone by in the world of wrestling. I'm your host, Dimitri Kalos, and alongside me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, Thanasir. Welcome, Thanasir.
Salutations and peace. It's so good to be on the show.
In this week's episode, we review the events from WWE Elimination Chamber and the immediate fallout, which saw Drew McIntyre and Becky Lynch both set up WrestleMania world title matches against Seth Rollins and Rhea Ripley. We'll also later on give our predictions ahead of AEW Revolution, which will notably be Sting's final match ever. We'll discuss that along with the general AEW product later on. If you are enjoying the podcast and have a moment, please like, share, and subscribe. On that note, Thanasi, let's move on straight to the Elimination Chamber discussions. And I want to open up a little bit with what's happened with the women's side of things. So as we know, Becky won the Elimination Chamber match. And honestly, I genuinely think she was the second favorite on the night behind Tiffany Stratton. But she's won that match and set up her place against what we assume is Rhea Ripley at WrestleMania. What was your thoughts on the match, the booking, and now this setup with Rhea Ripley?
Frankly, I actually thought that this was a really, really good Elimination Chamber match. We have to remember that post, say, 2008, we are under restrictions on how much we can sell the brutality of the chamber, which is a bit of a shame under PG restrictions. However, this one was a really fast-paced sort of brutality. It wasn't so much a let's sell every single bump. It was let's go into a high-paced action. And I enjoyed the spots. I enjoyed the ring psychology that they had. I thought that everyone got in a little bit of their character development as well. We saw Liv Morgan taunting the crowd, taunting the opponents when she actually got the pinfall on the heel Tiffany Stratton, who you wouldn't believe that she was a heel because she was getting cheered so much, even with that nice. I actually thought we were going to get world's prettiest moonsault off the top of the pod. Thank God we didn't. That would have been very dangerous, but we got an equally impressive splash onto everyone. So the match overall, I was really satisfied with. As for the decision, it was the right one, right? To have Bianca Belair and Becky Lynch as the final two, I suppose, made the most sense because they are kind of like the two kind of heavyweight favorites in the division. But Becky Lynch, even during the press conference, made it very, very clear that she was the right choice to go over, right choice to go to WrestleMania, and she's going to be facing Mami one-on-one.
Yeah, and to be honest, like, there's not much else I can add to your thoughts. That's exactly how I felt, and I think that it was refreshing actually to see the show open with the women's side of things and then close with the women's side of things as well. I was quite happy with that, and I think it helped add to the feeling in the night, which was that this is Rhea Ripley's event. So you opened with a match that's related to her title, and then you closed with her defending it. So I thought that the match in itself was great, but also in this longer storyline that they were telling with Rhea Ripley at Elimination Chamber in Perth, they really did a good job. Following that match, we had the Judgment Day retain the straps, the tag team straps against Pete Dunne and Tyler Bate. What was your thought on that booking decision and also the match itself, which for me I thought was a very, very good tag bout?
Oh, it was a really good tag match. They actually had some pretty good chemistry, which is great to see because Finn Balor and Damian Priest are longtime singles competitors, but they've really, really come into their own in the tag division. Obviously, I don't think that they are the premier tag team athletes on the roster, but they are certainly high up as far as two singles guys hanging out together. And with British Strong Style, I'm not going to call them that other name, coming out and showing their stuff in the hot, humid heat of the Perth climate, which I'm actually not familiar with. But if it's anything like Sydney, it's a pretty humid climate. And even in a summer's night, for them to come out, because especially Tyler Bate, I know Pete Dunne tends to have a bit more technical, a little bit more joint manipulation, but Tyler Bate has a very fast-paced action. So I admire the athleticism that he put on display on the show. Yes, it was a predictable result. Are we going to complain? I'm not. I thought I got a good match out of it, and that's what matters.
Alright. On the show, there was the Cody Rhodes segment on the Grayson Waller effect, but because I want to discuss all that later on, I'm just going to move on briskly to the men's chamber match and what your thoughts were on that booking decision. I'll just quickly add my thoughts. I felt I really enjoyed the men's match because I felt like for the first time in a little while, they did their best to really sell the structure as this painful environment, especially with LA Knight bashing Drew McIntyre's brains against the pod doors when they open the match. And then when Bobby Lashley gets introduced, actually just throwing Kevin Owens through one pod and then spearing Logan Paul through another. I just felt like they did a good job in that aspect. And even a guy like Randy Orton, a simple bump that he took, and he was selling his back for the rest of the match, which, if he was not injured, is just excellent. And if he was injured, at least visually, it did its job in actually selling the brutality of the match. And even on Raw, Drew McIntyre revealed he had some sort of injury with his eardrum that was caused in the match. So I felt like from that aspect, the Chamber did a good job of being brutal. And then also on top of that, I think Drew was the logical and correct choice as winner. So I was very happy with that. What was your thought?
I very much agree with you in the same way that I was saying that the women's match was a bit more, it was the fast-paced sort of action, which was visually entertaining. We were sports entertained. Although the men's match was on the other end of an equally enjoyable spectrum. And what I mean by that is exactly what you said with selling the brutality of the structure, taking the bumps. It meant that match ended up being a slightly slower pace, but with the facial expressions, with the heat that they were fighting in, and also with this element of there were no early eliminations of the match. It ended up being just utter freaking carnage towards the end. And we didn't have the same spot that we would have seen as far as an attack from the top of the pod, but we did get that brutal spear that Bobby Lashley used to spear Logan Paul through the pod plexiglass. If I can just share this though, overall, loved the match, loved Kevin Owens' performance, in particular coming out with a choke slam. Lots of great pieces to this match. On the booking decision, Drew McIntyre is a fantastic wrestler. He is a brutal wrestler. His character is extremely strong. I do not agree with his victory coming as a result of a brass knuckle punch from a third party onto the man who has the second or equal second most world championship reigns recognized by WWE, and that is Randy Orton. Randy was a hell of a seller. It's possible that I think you raised this with that Randy was legit injured, and that's why he was selling his back so well. But in this match, he did really, really well as far as my experience to sell that. We did not need Logan Paul being the cause of that. Either like a Future Shock DDT or a Claymore would have been enough to finish the match, or would have been better to finish the match. That's my view. Right booking decision, would have liked it to be tweaked.
I think my thoughts on that, because I actually share largely the same opinion, I think my thoughts on that could be changed depending on what the Mania angle is. Because if it does lead to Logan Paul actually facing Randy Orton, then I admire the Chamber for actually setting up further Mania storylines beyond just the world title. If it is just an incident of these two will eventually collide, then it is a bit like, might as well just give Drew that heroic, not heroic, but give him that validating victory. Okay, well, beyond that, we had the main event of the night, and that was Rhea Ripley versus Nia Jax. Now, this was obviously not going to be a technical marvel, but I felt like for what it was, it really did its job. And giving Rhea that really big, people would call it hometown victory. It's not really hometown victory, it's more like home country victory, but still, I just thought fair play. And even though we didn't see the Riptide off the middle ropes or anything like that, I think it was still cool to see it pulled off, kind of like the body slam moment. Actually being able to pull it off in itself was was great. What did you have any other thoughts on this main event?
I liked the details. And what I mean by that is certain things like the fact that this was in so many brilliant ways the champion's entrance. It was the main event, home country. She came out alone, even though she's in a faction, right? She's usually always flanked by Dom Dom, but it was the right call to say, no, on this occasion, this is all about Mummy. And that was the best way to present this character. She played the baby face, as was the right way to go. It just made a lot of sense. And I was very satisfied with the match. No, this wasn't a technical masterpiece. That's not what we wanted, though. We wanted more of that kind of psychological storytelling as far as I want to live up to the crowd because I'm wrestling for the first time in 7 years in front of my home country. And they did that so, so well. So it was great to see Rhea Ripley, the first world champion of Australian nationality in Australia during that reign in the main event. It's an historic moment. We lived it. We saw it. It happened. Couldn't be more proud.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good uh, point to move on to the next part of our discussion for this episode. And what I want to quickly discuss is on Raw, the exchanges between Rhea Ripley, Becky Lynch, and Drew McIntyre, Seth Rollins. This is now the official setup for their matches in a little over a month's time at WrestleMania. What did you think of the first interactions? Because I think the Rhea Ripley Becky Lynch interaction felt like it hasn't built up anything further. It felt more like a formality, especially with Nia Jax attacking Becky Lynch. So it's almost like they have to resolve their little thing first. But whereas with the men's side, I feel like Drew McIntyre is just settling into this role of the anti-punk figure so well that I think it's going to get to a point where even Seth Rollins has to sort of tone him down a bit. But I really enjoyed the Drew McIntyre Seth stuff. I really appreciated Drew's inquiry as to why Seth Rollins is even bothering with the bloodline, especially since it has nothing to do with his title or his brand, and that it's only going to weaken him and potentially make his championship victory invalidated in some way when he does beat Seth. And I loved Seth's answer of some things are bigger than myself, or some things are bigger than one person. And it was alluding to the fact that beating the bloodline is something that's important for the company. And it gave me vibes of when WCW was fighting against the NWO, and that it mattered more to actually beat this Goliath that is trying to take over, and that means more to a company than simply defending this world championship that he loves, and he's been doing so for the better part of a year. What did you think of these interactions on Raw?
I thoroughly agree with you. We've seen now, I mean, week after week, Seth Rollins has actually been showing, just like, well, actually not showing because he's shown it before, but he's just been raising a whole nother level to his promo skills with these quick whips that kind of just put things into perspective, right? They really make you feel. And we know what a fantastic wrestler Seth Rollins is. He's showing now on the microphone while he's injured how good he is there. And he's just proving himself as like the real all-rounder. And he is the true world champion, if I can put it that way. Very much kind of like a spiritual successor to Shawn Michaels. He's perfect in every way. Bona fide Hall of Famer. And it's these kinds of people that make world champions like Drew McIntyre. So I'm really, really keen to see more confrontations between these two because Drew is very much in his element at the moment. And heading up to WrestleMania, I hope he gets his crowning moment there, but in the best way possible with Seth Rollins being the one to put him over. As far as Becky Lynch and Rhea Ripley, likewise a little bit lackluster. I just got so deflated when Nia Jax came out because it's like, can we be done with this already? Like, let's finish. Get her out of the picture. Give her maybe some time off. She doesn't have to be away for a long time, but just keep her as like that special attraction as a monster heel and leave these two to tango, basically.
Beyond that, which I felt like was, for the first time in a little while, it felt like some of the other world titles were actually in the spotlight compared to the WWE Universal Championship. But there were developments in that side of the story as well, with Cody Rhodes firstly calling out The Rock for a match at Elimination Chamber on the Grayson Waller effect. And then on Raw, Paul Heyman, who I love Paul Heyman, so good at everything he does. Paul Heyman coming out on his own with no bloodline representation, just some policeman from New York, apparently, must have some connections. And the attitude of, you know, rescind your request for a match with The Rock, to Cody Rhodes, and saying essentially, all there will be consequences, and Cody stepping up to the plate and saying, the bloodline isn't hunting me, I'm hunting the bloodline. It feels a bit more like, instead of it just being about, oh, I'm going to win this championship for my dad, it feels like now he recognizes the odds are against him and he's actually going to fight against the establishment, which is the bloodline. I'm really enjoying that, and I hope it's not just a calling line, and that we actually see him in the next couple of weeks beat up Jimmy Uso, beat up Solo, actually confront The Rock physically in some sense of the word. What did you think of this part of the development in the story, which otherwise hasn't developed that much?
Well, see, that's the thing. For me, no, it didn't develop very much. I want sooner rather than later, I want them to just make it clear what the plan is for The Rock and Cody getting in the ring together, whether that's going to be a tag match on night one, night two, singles in some other capacity. I'd rather see it on SmackDown, to be honest, maybe like 2 weeks out, because I'm not super interested in that sort of a match. And also, how much can The Rock keep up at nearly 50 years old in singles contests on pay-per-view? So I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that's the way that I'm approaching this. What I do think is nice is that we haven't heard the phrase finish the story uttered all that much as we did last year. And what that means is that the nuance is entering here where, yes, Cody's initial motivation is become world champion, do it for his dad, finish the story, yes. But it's also removing the bloodline as kind of like the, I guess, usurpers of the throne or the unjustified rulers of the WWE. And he's there to kind of fight for that working world champion to be the head of the company.
Exactly right. And I think that is what's got me a bit more encouraged that he will actually beat Roman Reigns, because now it actually is about beating Roman Reigns in every sense of the word. Whereas last year, he was very content basically just to take the title off of him.
I think this is it, because if we present it the right way and give him this crowning moment, he's going to become a real franchise player and flag bearer for the company. Sure, he's not young enough to say do it for as long as Hulk Hogan or as long as Sammartino or even as long as Cena, really, or The Rock himself or Stone Cold.
Or even
But
Roman when they tried to push him.
or even Roman when they tried to push him, but he would be on that level of, say, like a Bret Hart or a Shawn Michaels, where for a really good long period, they were presented as that strong flag bearer for the company. But I actually would say with a level of charisma above, because he's actually bringing together the smart marks along with the babyface loving children.
It almost
That's
feels like he's sandwiched in between the Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and the CM Punk Daniel Bryan. It almost feels like he's like
that's a
that
very good
perfect
comparison.
mix of
Yeah.
all those guys. Yeah.
And I think it's important to say, because we want someone, well, we want someone strong and like a real locker room leader at this point. But given in the age of social media, you want someone who can represent the company within kayfabe and outside of kayfabe. And that's something that he kind of tried to do in the best way. Well, I guess in a very difficult way for him at the press conference when he was asked about Vince McMahon, if you recall,
Mm.
where Triple H actually had I get it was a horrible way to handle it, saying, "No, I have not seen the lawsuit," right?
Which is ridiculous.
Which is ridiculous, right? If you're that senior, you should be looking at it. You should be putting yourself in a confronting situation. Cody essentially gave the appropriate answer for someone in his position of everyone should feel safe at work. that should be a right to feel safe at work, and we should be doing everything we can for that to happen. And that's as much as he can say. It's not, I can't say those kind of words. And mind you, that wasn't him even going out to make a big statement about it. But I can't even get up to that level for John Cena. We didn't actually discuss putting this on the show, so it's kind of coming out of nowhere that I've brought it up.
No, that's all
Did you
right.
want to, did you want to bring up what John Cena said on Howard Stern? Is it all right?
Yeah, go for it. And before it turns into a John Cena bashing, I also want to afterwards bring up some of the sentiments being raised by other wrestlers to show that it's not just a Cena handled it badly, it's that his peers have handled it somewhat well as well. But go on,
Yes,
tell.
that I actually very much agree with you because see, the way that it was brought up, and I'm curious to get your view as a media graduate. Howard Stern is not a journalist by any means, but the way that he brought it up was he himself had to deal with friends who have committed these kinds of despicable acts and whose values were so separated from his own that he had to, as a person, reconcile that and kind of distance himself from these people that he loved, his friends. And he posed that same hypothetical to John Cena, saying, "Your former boss and mentor, Vince McMahon, is on the receiving end of these allegations. How do you deal with that? Like, how do you separate yourself, or how do you cope with that?" And if I can put it very bluntly, because regular listeners of the show know how I feel about John Cena, but I'm trying to be objective as possible. He did not do well. And I'm just going to read out like a brief quote of what he actually did say, so I'm not misrepresenting. He says, "I don't think it's complicated to talk about, it's complicated to listen to. That's why I don't necessarily put a lot of time and equity into it." Now, that's the beginning of the quote. These kinds of human rights, uh, workplace sexual harassment of any kind, sexual exploitation of any kind, where people are being demeaned and uh, just completely stripped of their dignity and of safety and of the right to their own body. That's something you should be putting time and equity into, because especially when you're the flag bearer of a company and you're seeing employees, colleagues, friends having to go through this kind of stuff, this is not something that you say it's complicated to listen to. I can't deal with it. Continuing on with the quote, he says, "There's still a long way to go. I can say this. I'm a big advocate of love and friendship and honesty and communication. In the same breath, I'm also a big advocate of accountability." A lot of values coming out here that he's expressing. If someone's behavior lies so far outside of your value system that the balance shifts of, "I can't operate in a world where this works," that's the end result of being accountable. Right now, so up until there, I think we can generally have some kind of agreement. But he says, right now, I'm going to love the person I love, be their friend. I love you. You have a hill to climb. There is the saying of, you don't know who your friends are until shit hits the fan or your back is against the wall. That doesn't make any of what's going on any easier to swallow. What he's trying to say there is that he loves Vince McMahon, wants to support his friend through adversity. And this is not like your mate who is experiencing addiction and you want to support that person through a hard time, or who's experiencing a period of grief and you want to help them through a hard time. This is when a despicable act has been alleged in this situation. And he says, just telling someone you love them, it's a hill to climb and we'll see what happens. That's that. So it's as if Vince McMahon has to overcome something like this, has to climb a hill. It's not expressing regret or reform or apologies or anything that a friend really could express. It's really disappointing as I read through this. And he goes, "I've openly said I love the guy, I have a great relationship with the guy, and that's that. It's largely my construct of operating with honesty and communication." Is that what Vince McMahon did? Was he operating with honesty when he had NDAs signed after his acts? Those are strong leads to handling any problem or achievement. The whole thing is super unfortunate and it sucks. He says it sucks. It's a little bit tone deaf for someone who is a victim. And I'll finish this quote here, Dimitri, because you're on mute, by the way. And he says, "It deals with an individual I love and an entity I love. I want everyone to have the experience that I have. Not only do I tell a friend that I love them, but I switch to the entity and say, how can I help?" That part, yes, You should, as a flag bearer, as a representative of the company, you should be turning to the WWE and say, how can I make sure this never happens again? How can we help the people and support the people who are victims in this situation? But I'll throw to you because I'm a little bit getting worked up here and I'm trying to maintain a little bit of calm and objectivity in this situation.
Look, firstly, and I think this is really important to stress, John Cena did not handle it well. That, though, can happen when you're commenting on something as really uh, terrible as this, something very potentially damaging as this, and really just on a subject that's so horrible. It can be tough to respond correctly, and when you don't, it can come across a lot worse than how you meant it. I think it's important to stress that John Cena is not the person that should be the target of any sort of uh, attack. We needn't forget that at the end of the day, it's Vince McMahon that's really caused all this. And the problem that we have is that Vince McMahon caused a lot of harm to a lot of people. But the people that he really helped, that were his guys, he's helped them in ways beyond imagination. And I think John Cena here is just, as you said, he's trying to articulate that he hates this Vince McMahon if what has happened is true, but he will never truly be able to separate that. He'll never truly be able to have that tarnish the Vince McMahon that he knows, because that Vince McMahon has helped him get to where he's at today. And the reason I say that is because Randy Orton said something like what John Cena did, but in a much better way, because he acknowledged the tragedy of what's actually being reported, what's being alleged. And he said this while speaking to, I think, Sports Illustrated, that I wouldn't be where I am without Vince McMahon taking a chance on me a handful of times. And as we know, Randy Orton had his own personal issues throughout the years with alcohol and violent incidents and drug suspensions and such. He moves on to say, I would not be where I am today without Vince McMahon. But I'm reading this shit. What you've seen and read, I've seen and read. As far as commenting on that, it effing hurts my heart. It hurts my heart. So you can see there's a bit of compassion on the horror of what's being done. And similarly, Kevin Owens, speaking with Inside the Ropes, I believe, he said, obviously everything that's come out is awful, just terrible. There's really no words to describe how sad this makes me feel. If the people that spoke out went through what they went through, it's terrible. It's shameful and it can't ever happen again. These guys, what they did correctly that John Cena didn't do is Cena really focused on like in times like this, you need to support friends because it's a tough time for them. But he didn't acknowledge sufficiently enough that this is a terrible time for all the victims, all the alleged victims of Vince McMahon. And I doubt very much so that this is the first case that's going to come out publicly about all this, because we know there have been incidents in the past with especially like particularly with women, and it's that abuse of power that we can't ignore that Vince McMahon had over the entire, at times it felt like, wrestling industry. If you wanted a job in wrestling, the biggest job, you had to go to WWE, and Vince McMahon was the top dog there. So, and even in some of the court materials and minutes, you get that sense of Vince McMahon put others to a standard that he didn't put onto himself for the sheer fact of I own this company, so I can do what I want, which is actually a very immature way to run a business.
If I could just finish on this point, Dimitri, because it's really good that we've offered these controls of Kevin Owens and Randy Orton speaking, and particularly on the point of Randy Orton, because this is what disappoints me about John Cena's response so much. I mean this with absolutely no disrespect to Randy Orton, but he's kind of like your average Joe as far as expressing himself outside of kayfabe. John Cena is a very eloquent guy. You and I know that. He's very articulate. So if he wants to express something, he's generally got a way with words that he's able to express himself relatively well. So when he's talking about these sorts of things and just refuses to acknowledge the horrors that the victims have gone through, it really does come off as if potentially like he's disregarding it completely, right? Because he has the mental power to consume or to comprehend what's going on. Someone like a Kevin Owens and a Randy Orton have also been able to acknowledge that. And I guess where I'm coming from this, as far as why wrestlers need to be responding, and I want you to offer your perspective as like, from the media, like what the media should be asking, if anything at all, is exactly this point. And it's something that I saw at work a couple of days ago, and that's the standard that you walk past is the standard that you endorse. So what that means is if you see something bad, you say something. A lot of this stuff happened behind closed doors or away from the talent. So the talent can't say, I walked past this and accepted it for what it was. But just like Randy Orton, he said, what you've read, I've read, right? That's gone a step beyond Triple H, who is an executive in this company. He's actually getting involved. So where I'm coming from is now that this standard has been exposed, we should be condemning it. All the talent, especially these high-profile talent that represent the company and for whom it's very difficult to separate the connotation of insert superstar name in WWE, it's their role to come out and condemn in a way that shows compassion and shows a way forward to go towards a world where we don't have these kinds of things happening. But maybe we can leave that there because it's a very sensitive discourse, but it's one that shouldn't be swept under the rug. I guess that's my perspective on it.
Absolutely. And again, I just want to reiterate that it's like this is hardly the sort of thing guys like John Cena were hoping to discuss when he's got movies coming out and publicity, things like positive things in his career that he'd rather be addressing. But Howard Stern, from a journalistic standpoint, but more from a moral standpoint, did the right thing to actually ask the question. Regardless of if the answer was good or bad, it should have been put out there. And I think John Cena probably understood that. And he was caught between a rock and a hard place of how do I defend my friend without actually saying the words what he did was wrong. And it's it's I don't know, it's a very messy situation. And I just want to reiterate that he didn't handle it well at all. But it's also, at the end of the day, him not handling it well is nowhere near as bad as the crimes Vince McMahon has actually been accused of and that has been alleged. And I think it's important that whatever the case, this be the last time Vince McMahon has any influence anywhere.
And that this stops in the WWE period, because there were other people as well involved from the company structure that knew. And then I think at one point there was even, I can't quite recall, but potentially that the company's money was used, or a company's account was used to pay the sums from the NDAs. So structurally and organizationally, the company is responsible, and the members of the company need to also be held to account to the extent that they knew things were wrong.
All right. Moving on to the different topic that we were actually intending to discuss properly. We've got AEW Revolution coming up this weekend, and before we get into our predictions, I just wanted to ask you briefly, Thanasi, have you enjoyed the build up to the show? Because my take is this: I think everything that's been going on outside of AEW, which includes everything about WWE, it even includes things like Scott D'Amore's firing in TNA. I feel like AEW just has been overshadowed, and it's not that they've produced bad content, but I think it's been forgettable and not as engaging as it has been in the past. Like, what have you made of the build up?
Look, I think AEW is a little bit between a rock and a hard place, because if they do a shit job in the booking, they're going to cop flack for it. If they do a good job in the booking, they're still going to be in the shadow of the road to WrestleMania. So it's kind of like a lose-lose situation for them. That being said, I mean, I myself have not really been following Collision as much as I used to. Like I watch a couple of matches, but I might skip through because I'm not emotionally invested. Even with Dynamite, there are some storylines that are quite engaging, but it's exactly as you say, that the level of entertainment value that we're getting out of AEW at the moment, it's I honestly think that they're a victim of timing because of proximity to WrestleMania. That's my honest view on it. And I kind of feel bad with the criticisms, but it is true that it's not quite as engaging as WWE has been lately.
I think it's also like something we should acknowledge, and it's not in a harsh way at all, but it's just they don't have right now anything box office. They don't have a single wrestler that's like, I need to see them every week. I think for a little while they had guys like MJF, CM Punk filling those roles, and that the even guys like Chris Jericho, who's historically been a big asset for them, even he's taken off a couple of weeks for his own band. So it feels like they've been stuck in a lull where they're building up guys to fill those roles, but they're not quite there yet.
That is a very good point that you're raising, that the building up guys, because if we had no involvement from Hangman Page in this world title storyline, I think we could have had a lot more of a fulfilling time having interactions between Joe and Swerve Strickland and becoming a lot more interested in that storyline. I think that the booking decision to have Hangman so invested in that main event picture has actually brought it down a little bit. And I don't mean that as a disrespect to Hangman. I just think that um, it's dirtying the waters, right? It's making it less pure because we're getting further and further away from the sanctity of the singles match, where someone goes over and someone looks at the lights and that's it. Likewise, Will Ospreay is someone who's like a marquee guy, and he hasn't actually been appearing until just this past episode. But even like storylines like Eddie Kingston and Bryan Danielson, which is on that card, you look at it and it's like, oh, that's salivating, or it's a mouth-watering sort of contest. But just don't feel like there's been a lot there. Um, so yeah, we could have gone about this in a better way. I mean, there are some engaging things about Sting and Darby against the Bucks. The world title match I'm still looking forward to, but I do feel that AEW is a victim to the shadow that WrestleMania is putting over it. So I do feel, I think that's the cause.
Well, Thanasi, this weekend is AEW Revolution, and it is that time of the year where we give our thoughts, our predictions. So let's discuss what our predictions are for AEW Revolution. And to start off with, I'm actually going to pick the three-way match for the AEW World Championship between Samoa Joe, Hangman Adam Page, and Swerve Strickland. And I honestly think we're going to see a title change here, and I think they're going to put it on Swerve.
I
I just
frankly, I agree with you, and I'm so looking forward to it, to be honest, right? Because he made that kind of he made it clear that he's still a badass on his during his promo against Joe on the Go Home show. He's the guy who broke into his rival's house, threatened the infant, basically. So he's the guy who beat up the 18-year-old at his own home in his own garage. So this guy's for real, and I'm really keen to see him there. I don't know why Hangman teased the exit from the match, because I got excited when he said I'm not going to be there and it's going to be a singles match. I was like, Joe versus Swerve is going to be better. But in the end, let's let's go for it. Swerve Strickland. Whose house is it? The new world champion's house.
After that, the next one I've got up is Orange Cassidy versus Roderick Strong for the AEW International Championship. And more as a hopeful prediction, I'm also going for a title change here with Roderick Strong, purely because I would love it if one of these days a new faction formed, said they're going after these things, and actually went after those things properly and actually got them. So just for that sheer fact of the first thing, this new faction of which Roderick Strong is part of said is they're going after all the gold, of which he's going to go for the international championship. That's why I've got him going over in this one.
I I see that, and it would be a very welcome title change for me. I guess I haven't seen this Undisputed Kingdom, though, being as strong as it could be. It's been a little bit of a letdown, and I'm disappointed because I was really keen for it. I was one of the few, actually, that was keen for it going into the new year. But I just don't feel like Roddy Strong quite has the momentum to unseat the longtime champion of Orange Cassidy. So I'm going to go with OC.
The next match we've got is Eddie Kingston versus Bryan Danielson for the Continental Crown Championship. And in this match, there's also the added forfeit of if Danielson loses, he has to shake Kingston's hand. So this one I feel is very interestingly poised, but I do feel that Eddie Kingston is going to get the win in this one.
I've got to tell you, I'm yawning here. I got to tell you, I think the same. And I think there's an easy way to come out of it where Bryan Danielson just refuses to shake the hand and just kind of like kicks his ass after the match, like brings in BCC. I I will say this. Bryan Danielson being more of a heel, sort of with the Blackpool Combat Club recently, um, has been interesting, but it feels like a hot potato sort of back and forthing. And I'm going with a realistic outside of kayfabe prediction here. Bryan Danielson has not yet held gold, and he's probably kind of like that Shawn Michaels phase of his career, circa mid 2000s to the late 2000s. And yeah, I'm just going to go with Eddie Kingston retaining to continue the reign.
The next match we have is a match that confuses me because not because I think it will be bad. Will Ospreay versus Konosuke Takeshita is the match I'm talking about. And the reason it confuses me is for Ospreay's marquee, technically AEW debut as a full-time member of their roster. And he's going up against technically a faction mate. Why? Because according to Don Callis, no one is good enough to face them except themselves. Which to me is just stupid. And this is part of my problem I have. Sometimes AEW books great matches on paper, but they let that exist on its own. They let that be the marketing instead of actually adding something to it. And I hope these guys do something well with this so that it does stand out. But I do feel a little bit just why is this happening? Before I give my official prediction, can I say what are your thoughts on this?
My view is actually that Don Callis being who he is, this is the rationale he's provided. But the story, I think and I hope will unfurl to be that Will Ospreay actually turns on the family as he becomes a winner, that they get pissed. Maybe he turns on Don Callis or something to that effect, maybe on the Dynamite after the show, and heads towards his babyface run proper as he heads towards All Out 2024.
All in, you mean?
All in 2024
Yeah.
in the UK.
Yeah. So are you predicting Will Ospreay to win here?
I'm predicting Will Ospreay to go over.
Yeah. I have to agree with you just because it is his debut match as a fully fledged member of the roster. I just think it makes sense. Though I wouldn't be against Takeshita getting the win because then he can say he's got it over Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay, arguably the two best in-ring performers in wrestling today. After that, we've got timeless Toni Storm versus Deonna Purrazzo for the AEW Women's World Championship. And to me, I'm intrigued by the history, but I feel like there's more to tell about this story. And that is the only reason, really, that I feel confident in saying I think champion retains here. Toni Storm wins.
The fans have not yet turned on timeless Toni Storm. Therefore, it is not time to take that belt off of her. And yeah, that's right. It's a nice little pun.
I see what you did there.
And I do think that she will retain. I think she should retain because I think there's a lot more to go to this story, notably to do with Mariah May, of course, potentially with some other opposition as well. But yeah, it's just not quite time for Deonna Purrazzo to become world champion, and that's okay.
The next match I have is Christian Cage, our patriarch, versus Daniel Garcia for the AEW TNT Championship. I think, again, this is an easy prediction for me. I think Christian Cage retains here. Daniel Garcia was not the original plan. So I think it would be a little reckless to just give him the title here if that wasn't where you were going for at this time. And I think Christian Cage is he's so good at everything he does that you wait for a natural conclusion to arrive before you actually bring an end to his reign.
I thoroughly agree with you. And likewise, for the exact same logic, I'm actually going to go with Christian Cage as well. We can still sell how good Danny Garcia is because if he's got Kill Switch, if he's got Nick Wayne at ringside, we can still screw Danny out and have him come out looking quite strong. So yeah, I think it's a safe bet to go with the patriarch on this one.
Our next match we've got to discuss is FTR versus Blackpool Combat Club members John Moxley and Claudio Castagnoli. This is an interesting one for me. I feel like it's not a match I would have thought would be on a card, but it's here, and I'm not against it either. What are your thoughts on who wins here?
It's a bit of a, like, I guess on the surface of it, it's a little bit of a thrown together, but not really kind of match because
Yeah,
they've been coming at each other's throats on TV. So there has been some build there. And I guess it's one of those matches that I didn't know that I wanted, but now that I see it there, it's like, actually, yeah, this is kind of cool. I'm going to give it a really good shot. As far as victory, I'm going to go with FTR on this one. I'm going to go with the baby faces because I'm hoping that they actually get a good run coming out soon. I feel like they've been a little bit flying under the radar, and I'd like to see them return to prominence a lot higher.
I've got Blackpool Combat Club coming out victorious in this one. I don't know. I have a sneaky suspicion that this might not actually be the end of this little beef. So I think I'm giving them the win here. But to be honest, I could see it going either way. It's more of just a toss of the coin for me, to be honest. All right, next match we've got is one where we don't even know all the competitors yet at the time of recording, and that is this All-Star Scramble match. And it's got announced participants so far of Chris Jericho, Powerhouse Hobbs, Hook, Lance Archer, Brian Cage, and of course Wardlow. And I'm very intrigued by this. But not necessarily because I think it's going to be a great match, but I just kind of want to see what it is. Like, what do you think of this, and who do you think is going to win?
It's
Because
unclear. It's
because
unclear what the stipulation is. Is it
what
1-4 to a finish?
I think it might be 1-4, but what I do know, and what we do know is that whoever wins this match gets a future AEW World Championship. Which to be honest, that is what's guided me towards my prediction here of Wardlow, because I think Lance Archer, Brian Cage doesn't make sense. Chris Jericho, I mean, he's always there or thereabouts, but I just think they're not going to give him that here. They're not going to need it. So it's really between Powerhouse Hobbs and Wardlow for me, and I've just gone for Wardlow.
I've got two pieces of logic. One is supposing that Roddy Strong does actually go over in the international championship match, which I don't think is going to happen. But supposing that he did, it would also make sense that Wardlow makes a run for the world championship. So that's what I'm thinking along those lines. Um, so he's one candidate. On the other side, because I think Swerve is going over and going to become the world champion, I think a good number one contender for him on a TV match is someone like a Chris Jericho, just to kind of help cement him as like an easy transitional number one contender. So
Mhm.
those are the two that I'm tossing up between. However, as far as what the original contest was for Chris Jericho to not be on the show, it was supposed to be a Meat Madness match, a triple threat between Wardlow, Powerhouse Hobbs, and Lance Archer, in which I thought that Wardlow was going to win. So in all, my prediction is actually going to go on to Wardlow.
And that brings us to what I assume is going to be the main event of the night. This show has been billed on this retiring star in Sting. So obviously we've got Sting and Darby Allin, who we haven't addressed it, but they are now the AEW World Tag Team Champions, which I don't know. I don't think that was a good idea at all, personally. But they will be defending their titles against the Young Bucks, who are now the artists known as Matthew and Nicholas Jackson rather than Matt and Nick. So this is a really interesting one to me. I think that the Bucks will bring out a good high action match. Where do you see this one going?
This one just it brings up so many question marks because yes, I accept that it's a good candidate or it's a candidate for the main event spot. However, let's take it as a given that it's going to be in the main event spot. Then that means that the right decision is for Sting and Darby Allin, or rather Sting, to put over the people on his way out, and that's the Young Bucks who are heels. So getting heels to win the main event of the pay-per-view. And it just doesn't kind of feel all that right. The alternative is that they win, but then they have to relinquish the belts, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I'm tossing up here. However, if we put it in the middle of the card, then that means that the world championship and the crowning of the first Black World Champion happens in the main event where it should. This one can go in a semi-main, it can open the show, or go in the middle before a P-break match like the All-Star Scramble. And we can get that special moment, I guess, of Sting retiring as a champion, right? That would make a lot more sense. Or frankly, even if he loses and goes over, it still makes sense to have heels win before the main event. So what this is leading me to is actually a criticism of the booking more than anything else. So if I have to choose who I think is going to win, I'm just going to go with what really should be happening, and that is the Young Bucks winning, because it means that Sting is putting someone over in his last match, and I think that's the time-honored tradition. What do you reckon?
I'm torn. I really am torn. I can see it going either way. And to be honest, it's a match where I just think, especially putting the tag titles on it, has just made it a lot more confusing and a bit more of a mess. Because the Young Bucks don't actually need to be crowned by Sting victory. They are so established as a tag team. Whether you like them or hate them or think they're overrated, they have a supreme legacy in tag team wrestling, especially of this modern era. So I'm really torn. I honestly am just predicting Sting and Darby Allin because since Sting has come to AEW, they've protected him like no one else, like really no one else. I don't think he's lost a single match up until now. So I think they're going to give him that moment. He retires, and they then relinquish the tag team championships. Or Darby Allin gets a new partner of which to defend it with in the meantime, and then drop it. But yeah, I'm going with Sting. It's one of those. I think Sting could fall in that sorry, not Darby, in that Undertaker category of actually going out with a win wouldn't feel like an injustice.
Interesting. But
Uh,
with the championship?
yeah, look, I'm not gonna lie, the championship's thrown everything out, you know, out the window. But yeah, I think Sting and Darby will win, and it'll be a nice feel good moment to close the show. But I mean, we never really know.
Such a
Let us know in the
weird
comments.
call.
Yeah, let us know in the comments what you think's going to happen
Mm.
at AEW Revolution. This one, I always want to hear our listeners' thoughts, but especially in this case, I'm very curious what they think of everything that's been going on with AEW and Revolution and the Sting Darby Allin Young Bucks saga. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's edition of the Audible Finish. Next week, we'll discuss the fallout from Revolution and the continuing build up to WrestleMania, which is now slowly starting to form together. We'll discuss all that next week. Thanasi, great to have your company as always.
Salutations and peace. Let's all have a great week and see you on the other side of Revolution.
Thank you to everyone for tuning in. And until next time, we hope everything you do is just too sweet.